Hi, this is Sonia from An Enthusiastic Reader. I'm so glad to see you. I'm here today to do a Friday Reads. It's been a while, and I have quite a few books that I've been piling up over the last few weeks, and so I'm going to talk about some of them today. So, just trying to think of anything really interesting in my personal world that has been happening. I have been walking a lot, really trying 6 days a week to walk at least 3.5 to 4.5 miles. So I've been walking a lot and enjoying our yard. Last year we did a major landscape project in our front yard where we xeriscaped everything, and so now we are just kind of enjoying the benefits of all that work that happened last year and really enjoying the yard. So far we've had okay weather, so knock on wood that it continues that way. And I'm going on a little road trip with one of my daughters next week, and I'm looking forward to that. We're going down to New Mexico for a few days, so we've got some good things going. My mom and I went to the Denver Botanic Gardens 2 weeks ago, and it was fantastic. It was so gorgeous. So that was really fun. And yeah, I mean, those are the big things that have been happening to me. Nothing else. So I think I'll just get started and talk about the books. The first book I would like to talk about is a book club book that I read called Horse by Geraldine Brooks. I thought this was a really good book for book club because it's got dual timelines, multiple timelines actually, handled very well. Like I never felt I was lost in the narration or the time period. And it's all about kind of a historical fiction about an actual very important racehorse, probably the most successful racehorse in history that took place right before the Civil War. He was running races, and he had a slave that was his caretaker, and so the story was a lot about this enslaved person and all of his backstory, his family life. His father had freed himself, had earned enough money to free himself, but not his son, and so there's a lot of issues of racism and slavery kind of packed into this story about this horse Lexington. And then it fast forwards to the future where the actual skeleton of the horse has been kind of tucked away in an attic at, I want to say, the Smithsonian. So there's issues of art, there's issues of archivism and museums owning artifacts, and so all of these different things factor in. I really enjoyed the art sections of this book. There's the horse portrait painter that was a real person, so he painted portraits of racehorses. He was commissioned by their owners. And then there was the 1950s where some of these old paintings had been discovered, and so what art curation and galleryist and art world sales were happening in the 1950s, which I thought was really interesting. And then we've got the current day story of museum workers. I thought the weakest part of the book was the modern part. I thought those characters were weakly drawn compared to the characters of the past. But, I can just brush that off. It wasn't that big of a part of the story. I didn't like that part as much, but I really enjoyed the historical parts of that novel. It was a great book club book. We had a good discussion about it. It brought up so many issues and talking about all kinds of different topics. Just because I had watched so many of my friends on BookTube, Sean Breathes Books, got that right, Priscilla and Brian Bookish had all read this book called Collected Works last year, which is a Swedish novel that was translated into English. And this is a family saga it's about a lot of different things, but the main crux of the story is that there's this man who is having kind of a midlife crisis. His wife has left him and his children, abandoned them, and never talked to them again. 15 years prior. So there's a lot of trauma and baggage that has been repressed amongst all of the characters because of this abandonment by this woman, Cecilia. There's also a lot of stories about art and portraits. There's a character who is Martin's best friend, Gustav, who is a very famous painter in Sweden, and he has used Cecilia as his muse. I love books about the art world and about describing paintings. There's something so magical to me about words describing art and seeing if you can evoke even a glimpse of what the art must look like without seeing it. So I really like that. I thought it was a very strong novel because it's told from Martin and his daughter Raquel's perspectives back and forth. And Raquel and her brother are obviously very confused because their mother has abandoned them and never wanted any contact with them. And so she's like this void in their lives, this missing piece of their lives that no one talks about, and no one really helps them to grapple with this loss. And so for me, they were the most important characters in the novel because they're the ones who had to kind of grapple with this inexplicable loss. And so that was, I thought it was a really strong book. I think maybe it was a bit too long, but overall it was very well done, and I can see why it was so admired and loved amongst the people who I watch on BookTube who had watched it. That was awkward, but you get what I'm saying. The third book I want to talk about is Long Island by Colm Toibin, and this is the sequel to Brooklyn, which was written 15 years ago. The story of Eilish, a young Irish woman who comes to the United States and meets someone and has to decide what world she wants to live in. It flash forwards 20 years, the Long Island does, the sequel, and we find Eilish married and living in Long Island with her in-law. Like, they have a cul-de-sac. If you've ever watched Sister Wives on TLC, and the whole family of this jerky man who's married all these women, they all live in a cul-de-sac, and each wife has her own house in this cul-de-sac. So like that situation, Long Island, Eilish's in-laws, her brothers, two brothers-in-law, and then her mother and father-in-law, there's 4 houses in this cul-de-sac is what I'm trying to say. So she, always being Irish in an Italian family, feels like a bit of a fish out of water in their company, and she is not fully accepted in very insidious ways into this family. And her mother-in-law just like kills her with kindness, but you know that there's this undercurrent of just kind of conniving underneath her actions. And so the inciting incident at the very beginning of the novel is that we find out that her husband has impregnated another woman, and the woman is married, and her husband is saying, I will not raise this child. Won't do it. So you will have to raise the child. And he tells Eilish this, and she had no idea that this had happened. Tony, her husband, never revealed that he'd had any kind of outside relations outside the marriage. So then it comes to her to decide, what am I going to do with my life, and what am I going to do with this moral dilemma? And so she goes home to Ireland to see her mother, who is turning 80. And from there, all of these life choices open up to her, and all of these situations, and she really gets to examine her inner self, which is very introverted and repressed, and just try and figure out what she can do. And it's the 1970s. What is she going to be allowed to do? What can she do financially? What can she do with her life? And so it goes from there. The characters are so well drawn. It's such a lovely, well-written book, but also kind of just explores all of the darker sides of people's inner thoughts. So I really enjoyed it. He's one of my favorite writers. I think I've read all of his novels now, and I would highly recommend that any books you come across by Colm Toibin, you pick up and read. I am a lifelong fan, and I can't wait to see if he writes something else next. One of my book clubs decided to read The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, and I had read this back in college, so 25 years ago or something, and I didn't remember that much about it. And I think there's a stereotype or a romanticism about what this book is about, that it's, this unrequited love story and about this butler named Stevens who when the book starts, he has just started working for an American man who has taken over the estate where Stevens has worked his entire life working for a British man who has been disgraced. And so he had to sell the estate to an American. And so now he is the butler for this American who has encouraged him to take a little holiday. And so he has decided he's going to take a little road trip. He's allowed to use the car. He's given a little bit of spending money. And the entire road trip is him mostly ruminating and telling us the story of his employment for this British, I don't know if he was a lord. I don't think he was in the aristocracy, but I couldn't tell you. He probably, I'm not sure. Anyway, so through his storytelling, we get to see his kind of prickly relationship, his hot and cold relationship on a very platonic level with the head maid of the estate back in the day. And he's on his way to see her and see if she would come back and work for them again. And he's pretty convinced that she would. But I mean, he is an unreliable narrator. He has completely deluded himself into thinking that his honor and his striving for excellence as a butler it's defined his life, but it's kind of left him empty. And it's left his life empty because the very things that he was espousing as the epitome of being a good butler have proven to be very problematic in terms of what he was willing to do for an unscrupulous person. So it's not just a story of unrequited love. I mean, he never seemed to, throughout this novel, love Emma, the maid. He did everything he could to make her life more difficult at times. He was never warm. He never opened up to her. They did not have the relationship that he thinks they had. So I thought that was much more interesting than them just pining away for each other and then, she was the one who got away, because I didn't feel like that was the conclusion of the novel. So that was very interesting. Another book that has not come out yet, is coming out in July, is called Long Island Compromise. Not to be confused with Long Island by Colm Toibin, but this is Long Island Compromise by Taffy Brodesser-Akner. Taffy Brodesser-Akner. And a few years ago, she came out with a novel called Fleischman is in Trouble that became a Hulu series with Tobey Maguire and Claire Danes. Was so good. I thought the adaptation was fantastic. So if you don't want to read the novel, I don't know why you wouldn't want to, but if you didn't want to read the novel, the Hulu adaptation was excellent. Anyway, she has a habit of writing books that have very unlikable. I don't want to say unlikable because I hate that whole discussion about a character needing to be likable. But Long Island Compromise is the story of a Jewish American family that is incredibly wealthy because they stumbled upon a factory. Like the grandfather stumbled upon the recipe and the ability to buy a factory that would produce styrofoam. And this has been a very problematic factory. It's polluted a lot of the groundwater. There's just a lot of things that came up over the course of the history of this factory. So anyway, this whole family is very wealthy. And that grandfather had a son named Carl, and the very first chapter of this book is brilliant. It is so propulsive and so well written, an accounting of a week when Carl is kidnapped. So I'm not going to give away any of the details of that because it is just so interesting to read how the family reacted, what happened during this incredibly important week in their lives. And then the rest of the novel flash forwards 20 some years, I think, to each of Carl's children and how this kidnapping has basically affected their psyche, their lives, their behaviors. And these are incredibly broken people. The entire family is broken beyond almost all repair, it feels like. And we spend a lot of time kind of marrowing in the details, the sordid at times and cringe-worthy details of some of their lives and their behaviors because of the way that they were raised. And the novel is a moral novel. It's asking a question of morality, a question of ethics, a question of examining corporations and capitalism and psychiatry and all of these different topics that are very, very important and present in our lives and how they applied to this family. And so in a way, it reminded me and made me think that I would like to reread Philip Roth's American Pastoral, because that's also a story about a Jewish family in the East that owns, I think, a glove factory, if I remember right. And the moral questions and ambiguities that come up between the father who owns the factory and his daughter who becomes a radical. She joins, I think, the Janes or something, joins some radical group and is involved in domestic terrorism. So I think maybe these two novels, I think maybe Long Island Compromise has something to say in conversation with American Pastoral. Possibly. So I'd like to read that again and just kind of see if there are parallels. But I think she is really smart, and the same happened in Fleischman is in Trouble, which focused on the main character who is a physician and he's getting a divorce, and we spend a lot of time at the beginning of that novel examining what he does when he's free from his marriage and he finds dating apps. And so that's part of what the novel is, and he's rich, but then it turns into something completely different by the end. It's not really about him at all. It's about everyone else in his life. And so there is a hinge in that book, setting up a question and then the second half answering the question. And I feel like Long Island Compromise does something very similar. And I just thought it was just excellent. I was impatient with it at the beginning, and it wasn't a book that I was like, oh, I've got to get back to this. But I did, and I'm so glad I stuck with it, because I think by the end, all of the, I want to say, indulgence of some of these characters in their lives is examined and talked about and judged. So that's all I'll say about it. But I thought it was really interesting, and some of you may think it's interesting when it comes out. I think it comes out very soon in July. Okay, so those are the books I've read. I'm reading a few other things, and I think I will save them for a future video. Would love to hear from you, or if you've read something good this summer, or you have a plan for the summer, or whatever it is. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.